So sometimes the only thing left to do is the gutsy thing. So it truly takes like a major kind of like life altering event to really start to kind of understand kind of those key life lessons that you probably took for granted. And that's kind of what this video is going to kind of get at here. So if you don't know, and if you don't, I'll link a couple of videos so you have some reference. I started This Life Reconsidered after surviving a major stroke. And thankfully, you know, because the universe was, I don't know, I like to think that the universe was kind of hearing me out, or kind of came to kind of pull things together for me that gave me an opportunity to kind of find my way out of that part of my life, which I think really empowered me to kind of understand life a little differently, or at least to kind of figure out that I would be a different version of myself, especially coming out of that experience. Anyway, all that I say is that you know, the pandemic was kind of another different milestone to kind of give me that kind of awareness. I'd already started forming some of these big awakenings, but you know, they were just kind of bolstered and reinforced by the actual global trauma that we've all been living through. All that saying that for a person like me that's already been trying to figure out how to kind of get back to some semblance of normalcy, you know, coming out of COVID is now the ability to kind of start like living and embracing these insights that were coming to me living through the pandemic. That all said, and with all that preamble provided, I will say that now that we're starting to come out of the pandemic, you're starting to see a whole bunch of news stories about what they're calling the Great Resignation, because I guess a lot of people are having the reawakening that to a degree I had when I had come out of my stroke. And I'm not trying to equate the two milestones. I'm just trying to equate the pattern that happens. Major crisis and major lessons come out of that, right? And so right now, the major lessons that we're starting to see, and the same coverage and the same narrative that's starting to kind of get a lot of visibility, and I'm talking about a lot of visibility, I'm going to include some news stories below if you don't believe me. But there have been a ton of news stories that have started to emerge about what they're calling the Great Resignation, because people are now coming to these epiphanies of what they want for their lives, because now we're kind of getting out on the other side, you know? And with all of that kind of awakening, you're finding that people are finding that they want to make much more gutsy choices, because they realize that, you know, life is finite, and that they have the ability to kind of really make better choices and all that jazz. Now, with all this said, and now that we're coming out of this pandemic, I think that there's going to be some interesting lessons to start unpacking about how it is you approach life. And hence why I think This Life Reconsidered and this channel and its goal is going to be especially kind of meaningful and impactful. And so I started reading all of this coverage about the Great Resignation that they're calling it, and just have started to kind of smile to myself, because it's a little validating and empowering. And I get really excited to see this, that people are starting to feel empowered to kind of make choices and have the guts to do it. And I know for me, I started kind of figuring out a couple of things started bubbling to the top of my mind, and I'm just kind of putting this on the table for you to have some food for thought and do with it however you see fit. you know, now that we're starting to come out of this kind of pandemic and people are starting to feel much more confident and this wave of resignations is starting to happen, people are really starting to kind of unpack what really matters and where they want to spend their time, which is really, really powerful. Realizing that people are really moved so much from the year plus that they've had to kind of reevaluate life that they're doing something about it. You know, I mean, now you kind of really feel like time is much more precious, or that you don't want to waste it doing things that don't motivate you and don't inspire you and don't challenge you and don't energize you. And that's really gutsy, because that also says something about the way we've been living before all of this, right? That means we were willingly doing things, not blindly, but only because we were thinking about the superficial. And now that people are starting to kind of have this kind of reawakening that they kind of want more for themselves, or they want the ability to feel less scared, they're owning it. So I think that there's something to be said about this wave of the Great Resignation and what it means to have a reawakening when something major happens in your life, right? For some people, it's the pandemic. I know for me, it was the stroke, and it was the stroke and the pandemic, right? Because they were two big altering life events. And I ended up quitting a job because of one of them. And I think that you just kind of realize that tells you something. Now, something else I also find really fascinating from all this is that people are really, really getting comfortable starting to identify what makes them tick, and want to kind of throw themselves into their passions and turn it into something really meaningful, something that allows them to drive their everydays, which I love. For me, I guess coming back to this channel is my what makes you tick. And something that I'm finding as the world reemerges. You know, I may have started some of this content in the middle of the pandemic, but now realizing that there's some new energy to kind of really start making sense about how not to waste what you're given. I'm motivated by the idea of trying to figure out what that journey looks like. And the other thing that I'm kind of really starting to think is really interesting about this Great Resignation, the return to normalcy, and even the return to this channel is you know, what does it mean to truly be gutsy? You know, I think that there's something really to be said about having the guts to kind of take action in your life and owning it. So I guess basically what I say, and some thoughts that I put on the table for you to kind of consider, is the Great Resignation and this semblance of return to normalcy, I think, are fabulous opportunities to really start kind of thinking about not only what matters, but making sure that you're kind of taking those meaningful insights out of the life that we're living and reconsidering it. So I guess I kind of invite you to kind of continue to go back on this journey with me to examine life at its, and not just all of that micro tiny details, but also how you just start making meaningful kind of like decisions for yourself, whether you decide that you're going to stay at your job, but how you're going to treat work, or what you're going to move on from your life. I'll be honest, you know, I go into this kind of day-to-day routine, but now I'm in this interesting transition on trying to figure out how to embrace life from this juncture, and really, really excited to go on that journey. So I leave it up to you to join me on the journey, and hopefully you'll be open to kind of trying to understand and make sense of those big milestones in life that we pursue, or try to live through rather. Hopefully you're willing to kind of go with me on that journey to kind of figure out how we live through this tough stuff, how we make sense of it, and how we decide to kind of navigate it. How do you turn that into seeing the world maybe? I was just putting some thoughts out there as I started reading some of this news coverage, and as we start to come out of this pandemic, I was hoping to really get some of your perspectives on what you think living through a major thing can kind of teach you. Any meaningful insights you think the ending of the pandemic has kind of taught you when it comes to your work life. Any other kind of awakenings that you think that you've had, and how it is that you plan to put some of those insights into perspective. All the kind of things that I've started to noodle about, things that I'd love to hear from you, and things that I'll continue to kind of talk about, and hope that you'll kind of follow me on that journey, and go from there. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.